我们继续跟和平号的执行委员会的代表川崎哲先生来讨论目前他所致力的废除核武器的相关事情。Mr. Kawasaki-san, now there's an argument talking about nuclear weapons, and they said that because the nuclear weapon have been with a tremendous power, that everyone have been afraid to use this after the World War II. So somehow that had kept everyone at bay and create a long period of peace after 1945. Do you agree with that argument? And what's wrong with this?
Actually, I do not agree with that argument. The argument is kind of based on the nuclear deterrence theory,
right?
Which is having nuclear weapons will make peace and security of international society. And those who claim for that argument normally say that, hey, after 1945, no World War III, occurred, and no war has been fought between Soviet or Russia and the United States, or maybe China and the United States. That's true, but when you look at the reality, there have been so many wars fought. For example, in this Asian region, look at the Korean War, Vietnam War. All those wars were fought on behalf of the US or Russia, right? And both sides had nuclear weapons. And if nuclear weapons really deter war from happening, then there should have been no Korean War or Vietnam War. And even between the US and Soviet Union, when you look at the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1960s, deployment of nuclear weapons, have come to very close point to the breakup of the total nuclear war between Soviet and the US. And now again, looking at today's situation, the threat of war is not related to international relation. Non-state actors are having a great threat. For example, when you look at the 9/11 attack in the US, it was conducted by a small number of individuals who have no high-tech weapons, just hijacked aircraft. And in a very low technology, they were successful in attacking the very center of the US. But at that time, US had almost 10,000 nuclear weapons, and which did not deter such a suicidal attack. So at the time of suicidal terrorism, nuclear weapons cannot deter those violence from happening.
But if you are small countries and surrounded by big enemies, sometimes you are tended to think, what if we will have the nuclear weapons? That would help us to deter other people's attack. I mean, this happened in Middle East. Israel is said to potentially having a nuclear weapons. I think in a certain period of time, Taiwan is also thinking of having nuclear weapons. But I want to ask you specifically about Japan. Now, you mentioned that if it's not been, Japan had been hit by nuclear weapon twice, that there's someone that is really in Japan want to pursue that nuclear weapons in order to make the country more safer. Is this still a possibility, or that we heard so much that Japan already had the capability of building a nuclear bombs? And how do you address to that kind of mentality that if we have the nuclear weapon, that would make our country more safer?
Yeah, so in Japan's case, there was an actual study within the government about the nuclear armament in the 1960s. And the clear conclusion of the study is to not having nuclear weapons will make Japan safer, much safer. Because the idea of having nuclear weapons for the sake of national security is a kind of one-time illusion, just like drug. At that time, maybe it had some sort of signal to others, oh, it's a very strong nation. But in the long term, the credibility of the country and trust with neighboring states and the international society will be severely damaged, you know. For the case of Israel, for the case of North Korea, having nuclear weapons is not causing lasting peace in the region. Because of those weapons, there are continuous uncertainty and difficulty, danger. So, yeah, in the case of Taiwan as well, deciding not to have nuclear weapons has been much wiser option, you know, to take. So that will not change. So despite the fact that some political leaders, opinion leaders may be discussing about possible possession of nuclear weapons, just as a reaction to some situation, I don't believe that Japanese public opinion will allow that happen. And to that degree, the memory of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is really deeply and widely rooted.
Okay, if there's still a very strong resistance in general public about having a nuclear weapon in Japan, how about the general opinion about changing the constitution and amend the Article 9 and then let Japan to become quote-unquote the normal countries by building up its own national defense and legitimize its own army? And this sentiment seems to be quite strong now with the ruling party LDP now in power. And there's talk all the time about want to amend the constitutions. And the neighboring country is quite concerned about this. Do you think that the general public would support the constitutional change? And if that is true, then would Japan would use force to pursue its policy in the future?
Well, for the issue of Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, despite the fact the ruling Liberal Democratic Party has been pushing the agenda for decades or over half century, they haven't been able to succeed in it. This is clearly because the public are against changing the principle. You know, under the current Prime Minister Abe, who came back in power in 2012, from that point, he has been really vocal about changing the constitution.
Right.
But, you know, almost 7 years have passed. Nothing has completed. No procedural rules have been decided upon those constitutional revisions. And probably he will not be able to change it. And that is a reflection of very silent but strong resistance from Japanese public for that. To that degree, the peace has been very important part of the Japanese people's awareness and the kind of identity after World War II. It is true that among some defense and foreign bureaucrats or political leaders talking of more how to say, militarily assertive Japan. Yeah, it's true, and those policy changes have been carried out. But in terms of national principle as a constitution, people's orientation is so firm. So I think that continue to restrain Japanese military activities overseas for foreseeable future.
Part of the reason why there's there's certain support within Japanese society for a strong defense is got to do with North Korea, DPRK. And I want to ask you about the so-called denuclearization process of DPRK. Their positive side and their negative side. On the positive side, people consider that it's a good thing that internationally there's a cooperation against North Korea having nuclear weapons. But on the negative side, it seems that North Korea seems to be blackmailing the international community and get it whatever it likes. I mean, getting aid and getting other things. How do you address to that issue? I mean, the international society seemed to be denying that already he had a weapon, nuclear weapons. But how should people should see this kind of things? And is it a bad example or a good example?
Well, I think, sorry. Well, I think that this issue of North Korea is about ending Cold War in East Asia.
Right.
We're now at the time of about 30 years from the end of Cold War in Europe and the world, you know, after the fall of Berlin Wall. The East and West Germany united, and one Europe was made. And in terms of nuclear weapons, the number of the world's warheads of nuclear weapons has been dramatically reduced since then. But here in East Asia, we are still divided by Cold War remnants. And that symbol is Korean Peninsula between North and South, right? And key question is, firstly, how Japan and Korea can reconcile each other, because we haven't been able to make proper post-World War II reconciliation. You know? And the second key issue is how to end the Korean Peninsula, how to end the Korean War, right? The second,
it haven't formally ended yet, right?
Yeah, still the Korean War is on the armistice, and no permanent end of Korean War, and it's on the table of the negotiation between North and South and between North and the US, but it's not yet formally made as an agreement. And finally, third key question is how to make sure that nuclear disarmament be sustainable and lasting. So all those three elements need to be combined and carefully discussed upon. And we see many good signs that in the processes of North and South dialogue and the US and North dialogue. And I think despite some difficulties, I think these processes will continue. So the question will be what kind of legal framework can support the long-lasting nuclear disarmament, or like peace and nuclear-free Korean Peninsula and wider East Asia. That's the key question. And for this goal, some sort of multilateral legal approach is very important. If you were talking about just disarming North Korea, you will not succeed. So the goal is nuclear-free and peaceful East Asia. And for that goal, first step will be nuclear disarmament of Korean Peninsula, not just North Korea. So the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons that was adopted in 2017 can be a very good basis for that. For example, if South and North Korea together joined this treaty, then there will be a fair deal. You know, on the side of North Korea, they have to abandon nuclear weapons, and they have to put all those facilities under strong international verification to make the nuclear disarmament irreversible. And on the side of South, they have to clearly part with the US nuclear strategy. Of course, South and US security alliance would continue, but nuclear-free status should be secured so that legally South Korea will be obligated not deploying any US nuclear weapons on their soil, for example. And Japan also is encouraged to join such agreement. If 3 countries can make such a deal by joining the treaty together, it will be a basis for a Northeast Asian nuclear weapon-free zone. And in parallel to such pursuit, a political deal regarding post-war reconciliation, including the issue of compensation or human rights violation and all those stuff can be kind of combined in one political package.
That, I think, is a more reasonable approach, I would say.
Yeah. So, but people tend to think of how to disarm North Korea.
Right.
But this, I understand that sentiment because nuclear weapons are really grave danger. So people may think, oh, we need to abolish it. Right. But in pursuing it, reasonable, fair, and inclusive approach is needed. And we have good examples in other parts of the world. For example, look at Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America, South Pacific. All those regions are now nuclear weapon-free zone by legal means. So in this part of the world, we can also achieve it. But for achieving it, we really have to tackle the Cold War remnants here in the region.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kawasaki. This is very interesting, and I hope you come back to Taiwan again.
Thank you. 谢谢。
谢谢各位收看，我们下次见。